speaking of the draft, I thought it'd be interesting to take a quick moment to think about what the other teams in the NFC West division did in the draft, the Rams, the Cardinals, and Seahawks. I'll start off first with Seattle. Obviously, they traded away the best player of their franchise, Russell Wilson, to the Denver Broncos, and it looked on the outside looking in, it looked like they were trying to rebuild. But
Right.
they drafted two offensive linemen early in the draft to address their offensive line. The player that stood out to me was Boye Mafe. I was real big on Boye Mafe. I wanted the 49ers to draft him, and now we're going to have to go up against Boye Mafe 2 times a season. For his sake, he should line up opposite of Mike McGlinchey and not Trent Williams, but we'll see how that plays out. But and they also got running back Kenneth Walker, who some said was probably the best running back coming out of the draft. And now you have Kenneth Walker, Carson, and Penny. You have a 3-headed monster rushing attack. So I think the Seahawks had a pretty solid draft. They addressed several areas on the team. Did the Seahawks, Rams, or Cardinals, did any of their drafts stand out to you? Who do you think had the best draft?
So 2 of those drafts really stood out to me. Seattle was definitely one of them. I thought they drafted pretty well, which normally isn't really indicative of them in the early rounds, especially.
Right.
They normally have been known to reach on players. We've seen a couple of busts coming out of Seattle. Most recently, LJ Collier, the defensive tackle they selected 29th overall. I think they had a pretty good selection with Jordan Brooks, but he was also considered a reach on draft night. So they're known to reach, but they changed their MO. Obviously, the year Russell Wilson gets out of Seattle, they finally draft offensive linemen. Don't take 1, but 2. They got Charles Cross with the 9th overall pick, Abraham Lucas in the 3rd round, I believe. And both were pretty solid selections. Cross probably starts day 1, and Lucas probably has the potential to eclipse or take over the spot that Dwayne Brown left in free agency, because I don't think he's no longer with the team. So he could potentially be a day 1 starter too, if not a future starter for them. Walker obviously provides you some insurance should Carson retire following his neck issue. And so he and Penny are there together. And then Boye Mafe is a pretty solid projection of a pass rusher that you could get. So overall, pretty solid draft. Drafted 2 solid defensive backs as well, and Kobe Bryant, Tariq Woolen. Woolen obviously a lot more projection than what he currently is, with those amazing traits, 6'4", 205, but ran pretty well. At the combine, I believe it was like a 4.26, somewhere around there. So the traits are obviously there. And in the 5th round, despite maybe the lack of pure talent at the moment, I think it's worth a flyer in the 5th round. Kobe Bryant, another bigger size corner, 6'2", around 185. So yeah, 2 potential players that you could have in that cornerback room after losing DJ Reed in the offseason. I thought that was a nice draft by them. The other one I want to throw out there was Arizona. I thought even after trading Hollywood Brown, they had a pretty solid draft. Hollywood Brown was essentially their 1st round pick, but they had Trey McBride. I forget a pick number. I think it was like 56 or 57, somewhere around there. Trey McBride in the 2nd round was a pretty solid selection to get opposite of Zach Ertz, just obviously helping Kyler Murray out, continue to build around him. But their next 2 picks are what really stood out to me. Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders in the 3rd round. That's your potential 2 guys opposite of J.J. Watt for the future. Thomas has the potential to slide inside on pass rushing downs, pretty solid run defender, while Myjai Sanders is a pure pass rush specialist who should be able to slide both inside and out. He played a good amount of inside at Cincinnati when he was being poorly utilized, and so I think he could slide inside or out. You have 2 pretty solid options there. And then I think they drafted Jesse Luketa with one of their very late selections. I think he's a good projection player out of Penn State, a linebacker in a way that can also rush a little bit as well. So I thought that was a solid pick. And I'm pretty sure they had a couple of offensive linemen as well. Marquise Hayes, I think, was one of their later rounds. Oklahoma, pretty solid player. And then Letitia Smith, 2 development guys over there. Smith out of Virginia Tech. Those are my 2 favorites in the NFC West. And, I mean, knowingly so, given that they probably had higher picks, given that they selected both ahead of the 49ers and the Rams.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jesse Luketa, the linebacker they got. I think that was a 7th round pick. He was projected to go in the 4th round.
Yeah.
Some would say, though, that you didn't need to select a linebacker. You already have a few there. And I think you have a few top 10 first round picks. I think in back-to-back years. I think they got linebackers. So
Don't worry, Lukita's going to play more than Zayvon Collins did last year.
wow, and it's crazy because he's a seventh round
They
pick.
just keep drafting him.
Right. They keep drafting linebackers, and I think the Trey McBride move. Some would say that they could have gotten, maybe an offensive lineman earlier because they need to protect Kyler. But you match up Trey McBride with Ertz and Mac Williams. It seems like they're definitely going offense, and especially with DeAndre Hopkins being suspended the first 6 weeks, they're going to need to
too. So that definitely adds to that intrigue because you might have McBride play out of the slot. Essentially take some off of Metcalf, or sorry, not Metcalf. What do you call him? Hollywood Brown out there.
Yep. And you mentioned, the edge rushers they got in back-to-back picks and Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders. Man, those are 2 picks, and you team up with J.J. Watt, as you mentioned, and the 49ers have to go up against those guys, Boye Mafe in Seattle, Aaron Donald, and Leonard Floyd in LA. Man, this offensive line is definitely going to have to come together and do their best against these guys because they have a lot of talent going forward in all 3 NFC West teams along their defensive line. So, those 2 drafts stood out to me, the Cardinals and the Seahawks. And you mentioned the Seahawks earlier. Like, they've whiffed on their draft picks. Like, ever since the Legion of Boom, they haven't really been able to get any pillars. They haven't been able to really draft any pillars in the draft. And one could argue that, hey, they're drafting at the back end of the first round in a lot of years because of Russell Wilson being there and they're always in the playoffs. But even if you look at the later rounds, they just really haven't been able to have success with their draft. And that's something that you got to point to Pete Carroll and John Schneider up there in Seattle. But it'll be interesting to see how their season plays out, especially if they're thinking about starting Geno Smith at quarterback. What do you think? Just top of your head, what do you think they should do at quarterback? Should they try to get Baker, or what do you think? Or stick with Geno?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Seattle, like I understand the NFL is a winning league, right? I totally understand that, but at least at this point, it just seems that Pete Carroll's job in a way is safe. And that it's going to be his choice to retire before I don't think he'll get fired. Maybe John Schneider, their GM, might get fired, but I think Pete Carroll is in a position where he won't get fired until he retires. And for me, I think the best way for him to get to contention again is essentially take this year with your quarterbacks, have a little bit of a losing season, and then be in position to select one of the top 2 quarterbacks in next year's draft, where the talent, at least it's not even the top 2, but really the talent at the quarterback market, be it Stroud, Bryce Young, or maybe even Will Levis, and then I'm forgetting another guy, but there's a pretty good quarterback also, another one, like a good amount of top quarterbacks there. I think that they should definitely take one of those. But if they're looking to compete, I don't think you trade for Baker Mayfield in his contract, nor do I think you should trade for Garoppolo in his contract. See which one ends up getting bought out, and then sign one of those guys. But at the moment, it doesn't really look like a promising quarterback room over there in Seattle for sure.
Hey man, I would agree. In regards to Baker, I don't think that, or I just say in regards to Jimmy, I don't think the Niners would trade Jimmy to Seattle. I just don't see that happening. But in regards to Baker, I mean, you might be able to only trade maybe a 7th round pick for Baker and maybe have the Browns eat like 15 or 16 mil of the salary. I mean, I know the Browns are desperate. There's no way the Cleveland Browns want Baker Mayfield in, the locker room in training camp. I just don't see that being, a positive situation for anyone involved. But, hey, we'll see what happens. Hey, I don't mind seeing Geno Smith or Drew Lock twice a year. I don't mind that at all. But